We are so happy to have you. This is our fourth Infuse Insider webinar, and these webinars are an awesome place where we get to hang out with you. We get to go in depth with you on various monthly topics to keep you updated with what's changing in the industry, what current challenges are happening, and what's coming next, which is the exciting part. So last month we talked about the most popular trends and technology tools in the industry, which was a really fun way to end the year. And now it's 2022. And so this month we thought it would be only appropriate to dive into managing innovation, why it matters, and what that looks like. And so much of that is because technology is innovating so much of what we do today. And innovation, as we all know, is a key term commonly associated with digital transformation, which we've all heard of and all know about. Shareholders and boards are pushing organizational leadership to become more innovative. But the challenge for so many of these leaders is, how do we do this? There's no magic wand for innovation. We all know that. We know it takes hard work, the right culture, the right tools, and those processes to be successful. So today we're going to talk about that. Today we're going to dive into some of the key areas to help with the innovation process. We're going to talk about the state of innovation. We're going to talk about the importance of culture and leveraging an innovation framework. And as always, we are going to have a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat as we go through the webinar. So now to the fun part. I have a few of my awesome co-hosts on here who are going to be sharing with you today. Phil Magnacheski, who is the Chief Innovation Officer here at Infused Innovations, Bob Borges, our Chief Technology Officer, and Stephen Webster, our lovely Senior Advisor here at Infused Innovations. So, Phil, we cannot talk about innovation. We can't talk about the process of managing innovation without first discussing why it's so important for organizations right now. So give us some context as to why it's this idea of innovate or irrelevance. How did we get here, and how important is innovation truly?
Yeah, it couldn't be more important. I will say, though, that innovation itself has been around forever. I think it's inherent, it's built in our DNA. Innovate or die in some ways. We've had to evolve as a human species over the years, and so that's really that primal urge to do that is in each and every one of us. What we're seeing now, though, is almost like an age of acceleration. I'll give Steve Webster a lot of credit. He had turned me onto a book, which I'm sure he'll mention at some points here, that the future is faster than you think. And if you get a chance to pick it up or grab it on Audible, it's just an amazing perspective on what's happening in the marketplace. There are a number of organizations that are out there that have built innovation labs and have really kind of developed the domain and expertise around innovation. And then startups, by their very nature, are innovative, right? Otherwise, they're not going to really get a place in the market. And then there's like this middle ground of organizations that are really kind of grappling with this. So the pace of change has accelerated to such an extent that it's working on some projects here at Infuse Innovations where the underlying technology seems to change on a daily basis. Anyone who's a Microsoft customer kind of realizes that too. So the question now becomes that in order for me to remain relevant as an organization, for me to continue to service my customers and not have my market share taken away by some digital disruptor who's coming in as a startup, how do I best take advantage of those technologies and business processes and people out in the world to help me become more competitive? So, and I think because of social media, because of different platforms, people see and can experience a lot of these technologies and changes on a fairly regular basis. So I think boards of directors expect more from their CEOs, expect more from their executive teams in terms of pushing things forward, because where it used to be they might see something in a magazine article that's published once a month, they're seeing stuff in Twitter feeds and in LinkedIn and all these different forms that we consume content in. They're seeing that on a pretty regular basis, and it's forcing them to really take stock of where they are in their particular industry and where they're going as an organization. But Stephen, what are your? I know you and I talk quite a bit about this stuff. What are you seeing from your perspective?
Well, Phil, you touched on the big. I think the key word here is speed. So businesses have been innovating forever, right? I mean, this goes back to 3M started their innovation program in 1948, right? By having employees allocate 15% of their time to what they referred to at the time, Phil, as chasing rainbows. So that's
that,
kind of where they were, right? So that's 70 plus years ago. So innovation has been around for a long time. Google started with essentially a 20% model, right? Around that. They've pivoted a little bit. Now they have 70% on your core job, 20% on trying to do new things in your existing job, and 10% for new innovation. So every company sort of finds their stride and continues to grow and evolve and find their stride in how do you create a culture of innovation. And Phil, your point around boards and senior leadership sort of plugging in there and saying why this is so important, right? On a recent survey by Deloitte, 78% of the business leaders deemed innovation as one of their top 3 things for growth. Yet only 26% said that their current organization is ready to do it. So I know our webinar today is really to talk about a lot of those sort of topics, and how small, medium, large-sized businesses can really embrace the spirit of innovation in their organizations and make it a part of their culture.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, I know, without kind of going on a long-winded chat about this, because I know that we could, but what do you think it is that's holding organizations back? Because those numbers are startling.
I think it's just a matter of you've got to figure out where innovation is, right? All of this has to come from the top, right? So if the top is committed to innovation and they can basically embrace innovation up and down the organization, Melissa, then it becomes, I use the term, it becomes built in and not bolted on, right? So you have a lot of folks who are they're really navigating the way of how do you change your culture, right? If you think about, most businesses are very metrics based around the operations for the pieces that their people are responsible for, right? So how do you embed in incentive systems and other things that basically recognize folks for creating innovation or working on innovative products or projects or processes, right? How do you create a culture where that's a norm? How do you create a culture where failure is accepted? These are not that they're new ideas, but as we know, right, if you feel like you may have your job at risk if you fail at something, then you probably are not at a company where failure is accepted, right? So there's a lot of behavioral components, Melissa. I hope I'm answering your question. A lot of behavioral components, a lot of org structure areas. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, thoughtful work that needs to be done to put the right components in place for a culture of innovation, not innovation from the few, innovation from the many.
Yeah. And Bob, you're obviously tied into all of the innovation going on here at Infuse, but also with a number of our clients too. What's your perspective on what's going on with organizations around innovation?
Yeah, what I see is a lot of change in the way companies are thinking. And like you said, Stephen, innovation is not a new thing, but the way we are thinking about our business or understanding what our business is. You take a company like Google. Google is not in the business of necessarily providing web results. It's in the advertising business. Facebook is in the same suit. So understanding what your business is, what business you're in, where you're monetizing your services, and how you should be leveraging your users, your customers, what your product is. That is a big pivot from where we were 10, 20 years ago. And it's a completely different way of thinking. But that's, I guess, the point of innovation, isn't it?
Stephen, you mentioned something earlier, and I think it's, you talk about some of the key challenges for organizations to really get into having innovation as a core competency is failure, right? Innovation by its very nature is filled with failures. And it's tough sometimes for an organization to just wrap their heads around that, you know what, we're going to do this and we know we're going to fail and we're going to throw some money into some initiatives and things, and those aren't going to pan out. So I think there is that concept that maybe is a little bit that people wrestle with, that, you know what, I'd rather bet on a sure thing versus something that, you know, I know it's right for the organization, but, you know, if it doesn't work, then I've lost $100,000 worth of funding, right? So I think that's kind of challenging for some organizations, just to kind of, you know, internalize.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the big things that we're talking about here that I think is so fascinating, and you kind of brought this up, Stephen, is like that culture of failing, right? So I want to talk about culture in general. When we're talking about organizations, you know, one of the most important components of building anything, including innovation practices from the ground level up, is that culture. So if you can't get your organization to participate in an innovation mindset or be excited about it or truly understand the importance, managing innovation is going to be pretty difficult. I mean, I'm assuming, would you agree with this, Stephen? And can you talk us through what that culture looks like and how you would build that for your organization?
Sure. I mean, where we are today, Melissa, with regard to sort of recruiting new talent and bringing people on board, right, is employees are looking for a purpose, right? So when you're focused on the purpose, if the purpose of an organization is to grow and innovate, and you're going to attract people who are interested in growing and innovate, right? So there's the sort of the high level purpose, but then there's the in process. Do you do this every single day, right? Because at the end of the day, there are words and there are actions. So as employees, right, and as great employees, what great employees want to see is actions, right? They want leaders who get them to jump in the foxhole to go to battle, not leaders who jump in the foxhole and everybody's looking down in the foxhole saying, no way, I'm not joining you in that foxhole, right? So much of this, Melissa, comes down to leadership, and it comes down to then cascading that vision, the alignment of goals and objectives, and making innovation an important part of your metrics, of your analysis, right? How many things did we try? How many things failed? Being transparent about that. Not throwing people under the bus because they had an idea that didn't turn out to be the big idea that you're thinking about, right? So the whole cultural thing is around, you know, embracing that level of transparency, being honest that we are going to fail, but it's all about also being focused, right? Because organizations, you can't just say, hey, everybody, welcome to our innovation culture. Now go at it. You know, so that's cool. You can do that, but when all is said and done, right, as we know in working with some of the behavioral tools that we have worked with, Melissa, some people are very risk averse, right? So it won't come naturally to them to say, I want to take a risk, right? Other people are very, you know, pro risk, right? So those are going to be the people who are going to be more innovative, at least in spirit. Now, everyone in your organization can be innovative, but you have to give them the freedom to fail and the freedom to be innovative as an organization. But naturally, you also need to hire and make sure that on those teams, you have folks that are more inclined to be thinking about innovation and thinking outside of the box, right? It's all about bringing it all together and creating great teams who can work on projects together.
Yeah, I love that too, because, you know, I think I hear so often from, you know, others that they feel somewhat micromanaged in their job. And I think that similar to what you're saying, if you feel like you can't branch out and try new things and you don't have that ability to fail, I mean, that's part of the work culture. Yeah, Phil,
I'm part of the work culture and also part of the management culture or the leadership culture, right? I mean, another fun statistic for us, right, is 63% of people leave their jobs because they have a lousy manager. Yeah. So if you have a lousy manager, what does that really speak to? It speaks to the fact that Maybe the goals of the organization haven't been clear and pushed down. Maybe that manager hasn't been trained properly to be a great manager. There's all sorts of reasons why you can't. And what really great innovative organizations find, right, is they find reasons why they can. When you look at the top innovative companies, right, why are they always technology companies that show up as top innovators, right? The top 10 are Apple and Amazon and Microsoft and Tesla, right? Because these are people who are just thinking differently. They are thinking about change the world products. So innovation is critical to every single thing that they do. So the question, of course, they have a lot of resources and they have a lot of money, and all of that stuff fuels innovation because you can make those investments. But for our small businesses and our medium-sized businesses, the question is how do you allocate the right amount of resources with the right amount of people to capitalize on innovative things that are right for your business?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a question from Jeff. He says, how do you square innovation, the freedom for staff to experiment, try new tools, fail in some cases, etc., with security, governance, and management around tools and processes? Anyone want to go?
That's a great question. I'll take a first stab at it, and Bob, I'll let you chime in as well. I think to some extent, the role of those things, security and governance, is to really put up guardrails around the organization. You want to provide the tools that will allow the users within, or the employees within the organization, to collaborate, to whiteboard things out, to think through things and really kind of explore what could be. But I think, and I'm not sure I fully understand Jeff's question, but I would say that maybe protection of IP around that might be important, right? So when you start talking about data protection, accessibility to the environment, keeping ideas that are documented from leaving the organization, right? Everything that we do here at Infuse, for those who have followed us, is viewed through the eyes of cybersecurity. So leveraging a zero trust framework in terms of who can access what, where data can live, where data can go, all those things become incredibly important because, innovation, and that's the spark. A lot of the things that will come out of this process could easily be done by, it could be 4 guys sitting in a garage talking about something and doing a startup. So again, if you're fostering this type of environment, this type of culture in an organization, you want to be able to protect the IP around it. And I think that's probably where Jeff was going with that. But Bob, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on it.
No, I completely agree. Having a good security framework for the organization, zero trust is the perfect example because you're not trusting anything, you're expecting breach. Now you are putting a lot of roadblocks in place. So if, in the case, as your example, data gets exfiltrated because of a piece of software that's downloaded is actually malicious, or it's been replaced with something malicious. We've seen that happen in the last couple of years, especially. But if that happens, is your data still protected when it leaves your virtual 4 walls? And if you're taking on a true zero trust framework, then the answer to that question should be yes. So it's less of a concern. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do your due diligence and still look at these tools, see who's creating them, how reputable are the manufacturers, the vendors, what kind of support can you get, et cetera, and really look at the code. If it's open source, fantastic. There's a lot of online resources to really vet this stuff from a security perspective. But also, if you're reusing code, Git is one of the most popular repositories for grabbing any type of code, whether it be PowerShell, C#, JSON, but lots of scripts. If you're going to reuse somebody else's code, read through it, make sure you understand what it is, what it's doing. And if it's reaching out for external libraries, you sure better figure out what those external libraries are doing, because that might not be visible to you. And if you can't find those answers, probably not a tool you want to be implementing in your environment. But even with taking all those precautions, that doesn't mean things won't slip through the cracks and things will get on your environment that you wouldn't want to. So to Phil's point, having a zero trust framework to really secure the environment when those things do slip through the cracks, super, super important.
Hey, Stephen, I'm going to ask maybe a somewhat controversial question to you. because why
We
not?
love that.
Oh, you know what?
Why
I
not?
love those anyway, Phil.
We
No,
love that.
but you know, we work with organizations a lot of times where the leadership is on board with innovation and everyone's in, it's almost already ingrained in part of the culture. What are the approaches that should be considered for organizations where, let's say, a new leader's coming in, he's innovation focused, he has an innovation mindset, but there are people on the team who maybe aren't there. I mean, if an organization wants to take this seriously, do you really have to evaluate your people in terms of cultural fit at that point, in terms of where you want to go?
Yeah, absolutely, Phil, right? I mean, when you think about it, we talk about sort of these 6 key areas of focus, right? One of the top ones of that is really around, it's got to be top down. So your point is, and you're right, we deal with a lot of companies who don't necessarily have an innovation culture per se. Not that they're not innovating, but don't necessarily have an innovation culture. But what they do is they hire people to come in and think that those people are going to be the ones who are going to drive innovation, right? And we love to deal with those people because that's really sort of our core audience who we're talking to, people who really want to do digital transformation or make that change. Eventually, though, that person will likely get frustrated in an organization that doesn't jump on that boat and take that journey with them over time, right? So if they're constantly pushing sand against the tide and they're the only person in the organization who's trying to drive innovation, what happens is they're likely going to leave and find another organization where they can become a member of a team of innovators, not just a lone wolf McQuade of an innovation perspective. So hiring folks who have an innovative bent with the purpose of supporting a CEO's ambition, right? A clear ambition, because the CEO might not be built for that risk profile, right? It might not come naturally to the CEO. But he's saying, you know what, if I want to be in business in 10 years, I've got to adapt, I've got to change, I've got to modify. So I'll go and hire some people to do it, but it can't just be, okay, I'm just going to sit back and now wait and see if it happens. And then, oh no, I'm sorry, it failed. So, so Joe or Lou or whoever it was who came in, we tried that innovation thing, Phil, and it just didn't really work, right?
Right.
That's not a commitment to innovation. What that is that's a commitment to a hobby. That's basically setting it up to fail to begin with, right? Yeah. So it really is a matter of getting that sort of top-down innovation in place, top-down support all the way from the top, making it part of the culture. I mentioned giving those employees that freedom to fail, right? Encouraging them to test new ideas. What's the and I know Bob will get into some process here, right? But it's just not, again, you can't just send out an email and say, hey, we're going to start innovating today. I want you to start testing some new stuff. Well, what are the ground rules? What are the rules of the engagement? How do you do that?
All right.
We also talked a little bit about, an incentive system. And what I'd like to do is, if it's okay, just give you a real-time, real-world story of an innovation initiative that failed and why. So my daughter is working for a company, I would call it a traditional retailer in the book-selling business. And the CEO and the president is all about innovation. And he pushed innovation down into the store where they created a whole new section of the store. But what he didn't end up doing is he didn't change the compensation model. He didn't change the measurement model. He didn't change the metrics model. So what the people who are operating the store are getting compensated and reviewed based upon the operations of the store. They weren't being compensated and reviewed based upon the success of the new innovation. So they basically were working against it because it was, again, a bolt-on, not a built-in. So what happens is the innovation failed. It was a great idea. It was doing quite well, but the innovation failed. So, cultures and organizations are littered with those types of examples where you're not pushing the entire process down. You're not enabling everybody to do it. And then the last piece, the sixth one, really is the establishment of a team process. And I know Bob will cover some of that topic today. But our employees need to know, okay, cool, Phil, you want me to innovate. Well, how do I do that? What do I do?
Right.
Do I send you an idea and then you take it from there? Do I have the right to organize a team of people who I think can help? Do I have a platform? that would enable me to store those ideas and crowdsource and things like that, right? So there's a lot of that is in place that's required from a cultural perspective.
Stephen, it's always so fascinating to listen to you. I have so many questions. Like, we could be here for so long. I mean, first, I'll just ask a couple and then we'll kind of move on. One is, do you have any tips for assessing employees when you're hiring, who are excited about and ready for that culture of innovation? And my other comment I just wanted to make was, I love that you're bringing up the fact that employees should be reimbursed or paid for that excitement and that innovation culture. I think especially with modern work today, it is more of a transaction, where I think in the past it was like, you work for me, you're a slave to your computer, 9 to 5. And now with modern work, things are changing, and there needs to be more of that transaction where the organization is benefiting from you as an employee, and then the employee is also therefore benefiting from the organization. But just quickly, before we move on, do you have a couple tips when hiring and assessing and looking for employees who are innovation enthusiastic?
Well, sure, Melissa. I mean, as you know, we've used the predictive index and things like that in the past to help understand, right? What are basically, from a self-awareness perspective, what are their primary behaviors? What are the things that people like? So there's a variety of different tools out there that can help you do that. Remember, not all roles in an organization, though, are geared toward people who are innovative in those roles, right? I mean, generally speaking, you're looking for folks who are going to be really good in those assignments. So the question I think that you're asking is, some people are going to be innovative naturally. Other people are not going to be innovative naturally. But as a leader in an organization, how do you create a safe culture for the people who are innovative? Guess what? If you give them the ability to be innovative, they will be innovative. But in order to really capitalize on everybody in your organization, how do you make it a safe haven for those people who don't naturally gravitate toward innovation to participate in innovative things, so that they gain confidence in themselves to be able to do it? Mm-hmm. So not everyone will have an innovative bent to them. But the question is, organizationally, if people are talking about innovation all the time, all boats will rise. Got it. If people are only talking about innovation, like on the Friday afternoon call for 5 minutes, like, all boats will not rise, right? They will seek their own level. So it's really a matter of, making it a priority, making it, and I talk about measuring it, right? It's got to become a scorecard item for you. I got revenue, I got gross profit, I got turnover, I got employees, I got clients, I have innovation, right? It just becomes a part of what gets measured gets done. We all know that. So if you're not measuring it, you're just talking casually about it, if you don't embrace it, it will be really hard for all people in your organization to embrace that culture.
Thank you, Stephen. That's awesome. Bob, I want to get into the nitty-gritty of why we're here. So we've talked about the state of innovation, and we've talked about how important that culture of innovation is in your organization. But let's talk about how we put this into action. So how do we manage innovation? Do we need to leverage a framework? And if so, what does that framework look like?
Yeah, so there's no one single right answer to that question. And we've heard a bit about the state of innovation, culture, risk, other challenges, but I want to talk a bit about how we deal with some of these challenges. And starting with, the types of innovation systems that are commonly used, and there's many types, but here's 4 you're probably familiar with. The first is, the company works to continually improve its products and services through new technologies and methodologies. So an example of this might be implementing a CRM system to aid or expand your customer relationship process, right? Second is innovation used to solve a specific problem. Maybe your aging phone system is holding your team back, and replacing it with a new VoIP solution or Microsoft Teams voice is the right answer, bringing you into the new century. Maybe the third is technology being changed to leverage additional capabilities. So you're developing augmented reality tool, perhaps, to allow your customers to visually see the results that you're trying to get them to envision. Something really out of the box. But this is adding something new. And the fourth is leadership building an environment for employees to discuss and then actualize those ideas. So leveraging an innovation management system to manage the life cycle of that idea or thought through its through execution. And how do you deal with that? So I'd like to speak a little bit about some of the processes that are often in place to help you manage innovation in your systems, in your organization, excuse me, such as not setting artificial boundaries. So don't let those preconceptions about software and solutions lead the thought process. Really think about what you're trying to solve for. What do you need? Brainstorm what your wants and needs, completely unencumbered by the costs or other limitations. What types of things would you want if costs weren't an option? If the laws of physics weren't a requirement, right? Really don't set those boundaries.
Yeah.
When you're brainstorming, you want to make sure you get the right people in the room, of course. Make sure all the right stakeholders are part of the conversation, especially about a particular topic. It not only allows for a sense of ownership from everybody involved, but you make sure you're getting all the necessary points of view. The only limitations to the conversation should be, don't talk about a solution. Only talk about your wants and needs, right? Even if an idea isn't a great idea, it can spark an idea for someone else. So you really don't want to put any guardrails around that. Another example is the sunk cost fallacy. And if you're not familiar with that concept, it's where a company spends a lot of money on a system or product and wants to use it, and even when it doesn't meet the best needs, the needs of the organization in the best way. While costs are obviously important, it's also important to not let existing sunk cost completely guide your thinking, right? I'm not disillusioned to think that costs aren't a real concern for any organization, but just because it's the way you're doing it doesn't mean it's the right way. Getting back to having the right people in the room, I can give an example of a CRM implementation I did quite a number of years ago. I won't say how many decades, date myself, but this was a particular tech company. So you would think tech companies deploying a CRM software solution, this should be a no-brainer, should be an easy solution. It should be a great adoption in the organization. But what happened was the exact opposite. They went on a lot of bad assumptions. The people in the room, when designing the solution, this is about sales and marketing, sales pipeline, the people were all executives. They did not include any of the stakeholders below the executive level. So if you weren't a vice president or higher, you were not included in this organization. You didn't know it was happening until rollout day. So what happened was, now you have sales managers, supervisors, you have people on the marketing team that don't want to use this because they're seeing it as, oh, they're just looking to track what I'm doing. And well, yeah, kind of, but that's not what a CRM system's about. It's about making efficiencies, automating the process, making sure that you're communicating in the way that's uniform with how the company should be communicating with our customers, with our leads, with our prospects, how we're dealing with the sales model in a uniform way, making sure that the rules we put in place, the systems we put in place are being achieved, and when they're not being achieved, red flags go up and, hey, we need to adjust this. But because of the lack of communication, because of the lack of buy-in from the people actually using the system, there was a very, very low adoption rate. So again, make sure you have the right people in the room. Make sure you're communicating or over-communicating. This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. When you're thinking about these ideas, don't be afraid to think in unusual ways. So don't be constrained by today's issues. An example is really with today's supply chain shortages. I'm sure everybody's aware due to COVID and all the work shortages around that. It's difficult for IT departments to get new computers to end users. So a pivot from that is companies are leveraging technologies such as Azure Virtual Desktop, Windows 365 Cloud PC to deploy, virtual computers to new employees in minutes as opposed to weeks or months. And right now it's probably closer to months getting new hardware ordered. But also don't think about, data tools or where to store it. If you're talking about a data project, you're talking about reporting, data mining, things like this, what you're using. So again, solutions should not be part of your conversation. That should come at the end. Because if you're thinking about, we use this database and we keep all our information here, that is going to limit your thinking. In reality, you might not be considering things like SQL Edge. And if you're not familiar with that, that's where data can actually be stored out on the manufacturing floor where it's happening. And now you can use tools like Microsoft Arc to query data across multiple sources simultaneously to get unprecedented insight into your production. So again, don't limit yourself. And I know this was said before, but I can't emphasize it enough. Don't be afraid to fail, as long as you're failing as quickly as possible. Right? I'm a big fan of building proof of concept projects and frameworks to test the efficacy of an idea. So if it fails, it's still a learning experience. And we should take those fails as a valuable piece of knowledge. If it succeeds, great. Now our proof of concept framework should have the next steps of how we continue with this process. So if we fail early, great. We've done this small piece of work and we know it's not going to make sense for us, or either it's too costly, or it doesn't do exactly what we want it to do, or it just isn't going to work. It's just not going to work in an efficient way for us. Great, not a huge investment, but if you spent 6 months on this project and then have to pivot, that is very, very expensive all around. So building a system for innovation management, you really want to allow the ideas to flow freely from either your teammates, your customers, sometimes both. So ensure you're able to manage the life cycle of each of those ideas. And there are some tools I'm going to talk about in a second to help with that. But not every idea can, or maybe should, be implemented. So keep that in mind. There is such thing as a bad idea, all right? You don't want to not have those bad ideas because, like I said, they can spark other ideas. And maybe this isn't quite right, but with a little tweaking, maybe this is a great idea. So you don't really want to put, you don't want to stop that, but you also want to have a system that can manage that. So where do those ideas go? How are they managed? Is there a voting system? And how can you prioritize those ideas and communicate with the people providing it? So communication is a big piece. There are some tools for managing all of that. If you're managing a large number of ideas from customers, teammates, it can be a daunting task. If you don't have a process to bring order to that, it can be very, very chaotic. And feel like an unorganized mess that you can never get through. Imagine if you had an ideas box and there were 15,000 ideas in it, 15,000 pieces of paper. That's not a great system. How are you going to manage that? You're going to get lost. Things are going to slip through the cracks. But there are tools available to help you with that. So there's tools like Canny, Bright Idea. They help bring structure to the process and give you that full life cycle, allow you to manage that in a way that makes sense for your organization. The company can bring forward ideas that they really want to drive in the company, and you have a lot of flexibility with using tools like that. But beyond that, and I guess Phil, I have a question for you. If you can you talk a little bit about Infuse Innovation's Art of the Possible and how that can address some of these items too?
Yeah.
Shameless plug, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, we'll take it. We'll take it. So yeah, no, we've been doing Art of the Possible workshops for a while now for some of our more strategic clients that we're working more on digital transformation initiatives on. And you had hit a lot of the points in some of the things you've gone through, and Steve, you had mentioned it in some of the things you had reviewed as well. But really, the idea is to go in without a solution in mind per se, right? We don't want to go in saying, hey, look, this is going to be Azure IoT solution or this or that. But really what we try to do is you try to get executives and business leadership in a room together and talk about their business. In an ideal world, and again, Jeff has heard me say this a number of times, all constraints off, right? Unlimited time, unlimited money, unlimited people, resources. What would your ideal interaction look like with your clients, right? How would you do or want to do product development? How would you like to automate workflows and processes on the back office? It really gets the leadership to think outside the box, to think ahead, to think about the business more holistically. And by doing that, to your point, and very similar to, some of the mechanisms we use to track that, the idea box idea and then evaluating ideas, it feeds off each other. They're typically sometimes slow to start, but once people get talking, they're sharing ideas and say, oh yeah, no, if we took that and now put this on top of it, or added it to this process, or we looked at this different market for the business, it really becomes more of a business strategy conversation. And then at the end of that, then we can start to back in and start thinking, okay, if we were going to do those things after we prioritize that, what ends up being a fairly long list, we take a look at that. How do we now facilitate that? How do we allow those things to happen and over what period of time? So incredibly, incredibly valuable to the innovation process. And something that I can't say enough about how valuable it is for an organization to go through something like that. Yeah.
Stephen, do you have any comments or insights that you'd like to add?
I think the key thing with regard to embracing innovation, Melissa, is the term in the business and on the business, right? So, we talk a lot about senior leadership, right? And especially small, medium-sized businesses. A lot of senior leaders in small, medium-sized businesses are still very much in the business and not on the business. Here, when we're talking about innovation, we're actually saying we want everybody to be working on the business, not just in the business, right? So ideally at the CEO level and the senior level, right, that's a higher percentage of their time working on the business. But ideally, you want the entire organization having a component of their time, having a component of their measurement, being able to be focused on the things that are on the business, that are going to take that business to the next level. The Art of the Possible workshops is certainly a great example of that. And Bob's very articulate view of how you lay a framework in place. The key thing there is around speed. And Bob referred to the fact that you want to fail fast, right? Our patience for long projects in these companies today is zero. No one really wants to be on a 1-year project, 2-year project, 3-year project, because the likelihood of it ever completing is pretty much near zero too, because we know that. So how do you do this fast? How do you get MVPs into market quickly? How do you get those frameworks out there? How do you test those things? So it's a great way to think about getting faster, getting more innovative, getting more creative, and of course, becoming more successful.
Awesome. Failing faster. I love that. Brennan asked a question: how can a balance be struck between service provision and established revenue streams and experimentation, frequent failure, in order to find potential future revenue streams, especially since the same resources might be used in both classes of activity?
Yeah, that would, Bob will probably have some great insight. He runs our technical team here at Infuse, but I would say generally speaking, there are a couple of camps or two kind of views on that. One is at some point when the innovation domain or innovation culture becomes strong enough and large enough in an organization, an organization may build out their own innovation lab, right? A center of excellence to kind of curate and have dedicated people, right, who are really taking ideas and then building out, evaluating and building POCs and then looking what that's going to look, become as it's fully deployed, and then how do you support that and all those things that go along with it too. But the other part of it too is, from an individual perspective, is that, I think, 3M did it and Google's does it and a lot of the great organizations do it. Carve out a percentage of time. Whether it's 5% or 10% of your week, allowing it to be okay for employees to spend time thinking outside of the box, coming up with new ideas and really thinking about the business. But Bob, I'd be interested in your feedback on that too.
Yeah, well, there's two things that come to mind, and one is having a framework, a system that you're using that works for you. And there's no one right answer for every organization. It's not a cookie cutter type of thing, but what works good for you, for what works best for you, your company, your culture, very importantly, your culture. But and that can help determine, where you're getting to the point where it's not a profitable thing. But think about, and you use the example of 3M and some other organizations, Phil, but the one that comes to mind for me is Xerox. Xerox had famously, and well, at least in our field, famously had the Palo Alto research facility, the Xerox Park. And if you're not familiar with that, that is where the original Macintosh operating system came out of, or what became the Macintosh operating system later on. But they basically handed it over to Apple for free. But this is a lot of development research that Xerox did. They did not make a penny off of it, but that wasn't their goal. Things like this can become innovations. They can become game changers for the industry, for the world, right? I mean, having a graphical Windows user interface, and Microsoft Windows was not much different. That came later. This essentially changed how we did computing, how we interacted with a computer. But building some of that in, I think, is important. It's good for a learning exercise. It's good. It brings value to the individual. It brings value to the company. Even if you're not producing something that is necessarily a billable thing to your customers, is going to produce revenue, there is a lot of value. So being able to figure out where that value is, where it becomes too costly, and if you can get revenue out of it, that's fantastic. I think that's certainly bonus, but that shouldn't be your only goal necessarily. Their value can be measured in many, many ways, not just in dollars. So keep that in mind. What's your return? Not just your return on investment. What's your return on value?
Absolutely, Stephen. Any thoughts?
No, I mean, we're touching on all of the key topics here, right? When it comes to innovation, there's really three key areas, Melissa. You can innovate with new services, you can innovate with new products, and you can innovate with new processes. And being able to really think through those things and have the right framework for each of those particular applications will make it a hell of a lot easier for the people in your organization to embrace it and help take the company to the next level.
Yeah, amen. I have one more question that was provided to me before the webinar, so we'll go ahead and answer that, and then we'll close this out. Someone asked, why do innovation initiatives fail? Does anyone want to take a shot at that?
Yeah, I'll take the first shot. I'm sure everyone in this group has had experience with that, though. I'll give you one, and it really is leadership commitment. Stephen, I think, had mentioned it earlier. It's got to be top down, and the leadership team has to be bought into it, because the employees will smell the disingenuousness associated with saying, yeah, we want to be an innovative organization, but not believing that the leadership is really willing to kind of back that. So I think that's one of the things that, if I look at organizations who don't do well with it, it's the leadership commitment just isn't there. But Stephen, what do you think?
At the end of the day, if the leaders are committed to it and they are demonstrating their commitment to it, the employees will be committed to it. And whether that's the metrics or the reward system or any of those things. The other piece of that, though, is they all need to be able to embrace failure, right? So this gets into that other topic that we talked about earlier, which is the culture safe for failure? Mm-hmm. Some people, right, won't want to get involved in an innovative project because of the fear of failure and then their name being attached to it, right? So you have to, especially for folks who are risk averse, so you really have to create a culture that enables the organization to embrace failure. If you don't embrace it and you create fear around it, it'll be very difficult for your innovative projects to either be properly staffed, properly resourced, or to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And to help them see that vision and have a culture of creativity within your organization. Bob, do you have any comments before we close this out? I don't think we have any other questions left.
Yeah, just to that point, I would add on communication is also important. From getting that top-down is super important, but communicating that from top down is just as important. I can think specifically of a SharePoint deployment I was included in for a very, very large enterprise organization, a household name. I won't repeat their name here, but it was a very, very large organization. Their users did not want to adopt the new system. They were very adverse to it. While the executive management wanted it, they designed it. They had the right people in the room to help get it prepared and get it and be involved in the process. Because even though they were 1,000% on board with going this direction, they had not communicated that with the rest of the staff. So, communicating that yes, this is what we're doing. Be very clear. This is what we're doing. This is the direction we're going. This is why we're doing it. And any questions? That's sometimes that can be very, very important. Again, that is different from culture to culture in different organizations. Everybody communicates differently. Some organizations are more collaborative than others. This particular organization was a very top-down type of organization, very hierarchy-driven type of command structure. So what works for them might not work for your organization, but you're going to feel that out. You know your organization better than anybody. So
yeah, absolutely. Kristen asks, so if the leader isn't one of those people that's naturally driven and talented at innovation, what tips do you recommend for them to lead their team in that direction?
Yeah, I would. I see Jeff had responded there as well, but I would say find someone you trust who can be your innovation buddy. Right. So it may not be inherent in your personal DNA, but knowing you have to do it and having someone on your side who can help drive that within the organization would be the record. And it doesn't have to be someone within the organization. It could be someone from outside that you trust that you can then bring in to help drive those things. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, someone like us. Well, awesome. Thank you guys so much for coming on here and presenting today. There was a lot of awesome information that was shared. We also appreciate everyone who attended. So thank you so much. We really enjoy this time. Next month, we are going to be diving into data-driven marketing, which is going to be an exciting one. So stay tuned for any info on that. If you ever have any questions, you know where to find us. And again, thank you for coming, and we hope that you have an awesome day. Bye, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.